Hello, I'm Lauren Reddington, National Solar Tour Director and Webinar Manager for the American Solar Energy Society, and I would like to thank you all for joining us on our monthly webinar series. To kick off, I would like to inform you of who ACES is and highlight some of our current events and programs. The American Solar Energy Society, also known as ACES, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was established in 1954 and advocates for sustainable living and 100% renewable energy by sharing information, events, and resources to cultivate community and power progress. You can join our community anytime at aces.org/join, and webinar registrants get a special 10% off discount on all ACES memberships except for life members by using promo code webinar. Our next upcoming event is the National Solar Tour, with the official weekend kicking off on October 1st and 2nd. The National Solar Tour is a truly effective program for increasing solar adoption and the implementation of sustainability upgrades by featuring a collection of local solar tours, in addition to single solar sites across the country that feature solar and sustainable technologies. There's still time to get involved, and you can sign up your own solar site or local solar tour at nationalsolartour.org/signup. But the deadline to do so is September 15th. You can host your event solely in person, virtually, or as a hybrid of in-person attendance and through virtual photo and/or video tours. Save the date. ACES will be having our 52nd annual National Solar Conference, Solar 2023, in Boulder, Colorado, at the University of Colorado Boulder from August 8th through the 11th, 2023. ACES also invites you to participate in our online community. This is a space for our community to collaborate, share content and information, and network with each other. We have a special Ask a Renewable Energy Expert Forum, where we have our technical division experts on call to help answer your questions about anything solar sustainability related. And be sure to hop online and start engaging at community.aces.org. Thank you for listening to these ACES updates. I want to note that this webinar will be available in a recorded format soon. I will follow up with everyone once it is available. I will ask that you submit your comments to the chat section and your questions to the Q&A section, and we will review and answer everything at the end of the presentation. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's presenters. Gilbert Michaud, PhD, is an assistant professor of environmental policy at the School of Environmental Sustainability at Loyola University Chicago. His research focuses on solar energy policy, electric utilities, and sustainable economic development. Ron Celentano, President, Passia and Celentano Energy Services, CES. Ron is a solar energy industry consultant with CES. He started working in the solar energy field over 40 years ago, with more than 25 years focused on solar PV. He has been involved with helping shape most of Pennsylvania state laws and regulations in solar energy over the past 2 decades, including net metering, interconnection, PA solar share requirement, closing the borders, and many other policy-related issues. Currently, he is president of Pennsylvania Solar and Storage Industries Association, VP of Mid-Atlantic Solar and Storage Industries Association for Pennsylvania, and Technical Director, Philadelphia Solar Energy Association. And he holds a BS in Physics and MS in the field of mechanical engineering. We did have a last-minute change in our speaker lineup, and we were lucky to have Andy Wall step in today. Andy is the founder and CEO of Add Energy Solar Installation Company in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, operating since 2015. He's a board member and acting VP of New Jersey Policy for MCA since 2021. He has a prior career in banking, BSc degree in physics, classically trained guitarist, but mostly just strums the ukulele now. He's an avid soccer player, but on long-term leave from tendon problems. Also into hiking and owns a lodge in the Catskills. And now I will turn it over to Gilbert.
Great. Thanks, Lauren, for the intro. Hi, everyone. I'm Gilbert Michaud. As noted, I'm actually the policy division chair for ACES, and we're pleased to be doing today's webinar focused on solar policy issues in the Northeast. It's admittedly a bit hard to focus on every state in this like very large region. But we're honored to have folks that are plugged into sort of the scene in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and around that area. And so we'll answer questions that you might have about the broader region as well as best we can. Just so you all know, the goal here eventually is to do sort of these regional policy update webinars into next year and beyond. So this is the first one in this sort of new series, if you will. So stay tuned for subsequent webinars focused, probably on the South and the Midwest and other regions as well. So as noted, I'm Gilbert. I'm a professor here at Loyola in Chicago. A lot of my work very pointedly focuses on, again, solar policy issues. I do a lot of work with utilities and developers and local governments, especially on the workforce and economic impact side of things. Do a lot of studies focused on that, do a lot of studies focused on pollution mitigation and the environmental sort of benefits of solar energy deployment. Right now, the big thing that I'm working on, I'm a co-principal investigator on a US Department of Energy grant focused on utility scale, these really large solar facilities. I don't know how much we'll get into that in today's discussion necessarily, but here in the Midwest, there's been a lot of these projects popping up all over the place. Really interesting debates around policy, tax payments, land use issues, and those types of things. But yeah, the Northeast region is sort of near and dear to me. I'm originally from Maine. Most of my family lives in Connecticut, Massachusetts, in that area. So I'm pleased to sort of be helping with this webinar today. There's a lot of stuff going on at the federal level as well. Just a quick sort of shout out to the this new IRA, this Inflation Reduction Act, and a lot of the new announcements that have just come out in the past couple weeks regarding tax credit extensions, rebate programs for things like solar and EVs and battery storage. And again, I don't know how much we'll talk about that in today's discussion, but it's really important to note what's going on at the federal level. Here at Loyola, I teach energy law and policy, and we talk a lot about federalism and the role and the power, frankly, of state governments to sort of push clean energy programs at the state level. But it's also important to know what's going on at the federal level. And this sort of comes in different waves, depending on the administration, of course. But with that, a quick reminder, and thanks, Lauren, once again, that you can type in questions in the chat. We'll probably try to save, 15 minutes or so at the end to get to those. And I'm happy to try to answer questions myself if I can be useful. We've had a lot of great engagement in past ACES webinars that I've either run or spoken on or just have attended as an attendee. So we'd love to get engaged with you all today as well. So with that, I'll wrap up for the sake of time and turn it over to our panelists to talk about what's going on in their state markets. So Ron, I think you are first up. I'll turn it over to you. You should be able to share your screen and go. And you're muted.
Oh, so can you hear that?
There you go. Yeah.
And you can see the screen?
Yes. Floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay, great. Hello, thank you very much for having me on today's webinar. And I'm going to just really focus on Pennsylvania. It's really the only focus I have on what's going on with solar. I've been involved in Pennsylvania for a long time. And I'm going to probably start off covering a couple of the policy issues that we already have had in place for a while, get into then showing the status of what we have installed and how it relates to our current requirement, and then touch base a little bit on the policy stuff that we've been trying to get changed or expanded upon, which we've not had much luck on for a very long time. So moving forward on that, let's see here. Whoop, how come this isn't working? Not my slides aren't advancing. They advancing. That's weird.
Usually you just need to press like the down arrow.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. And nothing is going on. It's weird because when I experiment with it, it worked fine. Oh, okay, that worked. Okay, see how that goes. Okay, I'm going to start off with just talking about a little bit on net metering. Now, some of you may have seen that there was a policy jam that ACES had back in June, and I discussed some of the net metering, at least what we have in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, one of the good things of Pennsylvania is we have really good net metering in place and have had for a couple of decades now. So it's not like a lot of other states where it's based on the size of the system that can go in, is based on the usage and certain percentages of that usage on an annual basis. In Pennsylvania, it's actually based on actual capacity. So a residential system could be as large as a 50 kW system, regardless of how much load is at that particular site. And then there's a 3 megawatt for non-residential. And then there's up to a 5 megawatt for microgrid or emergency kind of systems, hospitals, whatever. So that can, not that that's really been utilized that much. There's no aggregate cap in Pennsylvania. So there's, it's still unlimited to how much can be installed with net metering. And what's also a real advantage is the excess generation on the annual side of things. You get credited for the basically on the price to compare, which is equivalent to about the generation price. So it's not avoided cost. It's not lost entirely or forfeited. So you get about almost half your bill back. Mostly on from annual excess. So it's a bit rich, I guess. And maybe we have some places that we can tweak it if it comes down to having to change net metering coming forward. We also have virtual meter aggregation, which tends to be not quite at all a community solar or virtual net metering, but it does allow for having a system installed someplace. And if you have another account within a 2-mile radius, you can have excess being used against a bill in a neighboring facility. Real quick on interconnection, this is kind of a snapshot of what one of our utilities have. We do have standard interconnection rules across the state, and showing the level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Basically, level 1 is up to a 10 kW, and then up to the 3 or 5 megawatt for level 2. So those are the days that are allowed for the application process. Unfortunately, it goes far beyond that, those time periods, and there's been lots of problems with interconnection and glitches that seem to come up. The upper screen is kind of showing sort of that step-by-step process as for you for getting that, eventually getting approved. We have some problems with some in Pennsylvania. It's certainly in the southeast area in PICO territory, where we have a lot of their territory is very low voltage distribution. So it's like 4 kV. And that tends to be a real problem because, as you know, when you have a solar system with PV, real power, it jacks up the voltage a little bit. When you have a low voltage distribution line, you have very little tolerance for how much voltage rise you're allowed. So that tends to be problematic for having to downsize a system size if you're with an application, or maybe upgrading service lines, whatever. But we do utilize smart inverter functionality quite a bit in PICO and PP&L territory, whereby power factors are used, or volt-var operations are used, so that you can squeeze a little bit more of capacity in there. This is our current, what everyone else has, a renewable portfolio standard, RPS, but we came up with a new name calling alternative energy portfolio standard. So this is allowing for non-renewable energy sources to be part of that mix. And this goes back to 2004. And it's showing what we currently have as compared to, I believe this is the more current of other goals that our surrounding states have, which are far, 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 in excess of to what we have. We've already met our May 2021. May 2021. We have met our goals of 8. So we have a tier 1 and a tier 2, and tier 1 is 8% renewables, 7.5% of it is basically of all renewables, but 0.5% was a solar carve out that had to come from in-state solar. It used to be open to PJM territory. 13 states could sell those credits into Pennsylvania. We were able to close the borders for the solar part of that in 2017. And then the other 7.5% is coming from out of state. And then the tier 2 is another 10% of alternate sources. And I will show you, this is kind of that list of how those are broken down, what the tier 1 renewable sources are in tier 2. And you could even see in tier 1, not everything is fully renewable. But a lot of some of the large solar systems could land in tier 1. This is kind of showing, I mentioned about how we closed our borders in 2017 for solar. Well, it still came down to, we had to grandfather in existing contracts, because what happened was a lot of projects were selling from out of state into Pennsylvania, and we just weren't getting anything, either jobs nor the offset of emissions, in Pennsylvania, because everything was coming from the state. So when we closed the borders, that allowed for everything that we were requiring, that 0.5% of sales in Pennsylvania would come from, would be installed in Pennsylvania. But it still took a while for those contracts to end that were from out of state. And currently, you can see on this left graph here, this barred graph, that about almost 80% is still in Pennsylvania. This is as of last year, but there's a little bit left in North Carolina coming in, and from Ohio. But this coming year, those contracts will end, and then it'll all be Pennsylvania. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but there's one of the bills that we have in place. We're trying to, in fact, close or mostly close our tier 1 of our AEPS, because you could see there too, the middle column, it's showing only a very small percentage, like 20% is actually wind and solar that's primarily in Pennsylvania, and the rest of it's coming from out of state. So there too, we're trying to actually close that out. And what that'll do is it'll require a lot of the left of that 7.5% or 6% that's left of it, that would have to be probably solar large projects in the state. This is our current, as of yesterday, I went through some of the data that we have on what is installed in Pennsylvania. This is showing both the annual PV capacity over time, as well as the cumulative capacity. So we're about 760 megawatts of DC, and which is about 626 megawatts of AC. And you could see the fluctuation, as time went on. That blip in the beginning, in the annual graph between 2010 and 2012, we had a state grant program, the Sunshine Program, that actually got that moving. So that's why that's you see that kind of that spike. The money ran out, and you can see it crashed pretty much. That was about the same time that our SREC market, our solar renewable energy credit market under our APS, also saturated. So the price for SRECs really dropped as well. So that really crashed the market in the 2014, 2015 area. This is just showing the number of systems, same thing, but annual and cumulative. So we have about over 36,000 systems installed. And this is kind of that breakdown of those systems. And as you can see, a majority of those systems are small. It's a mostly residential, small commercial, because most of those fall into that less than 15 kW or under a 250 kW in terms of number and sizes, as you can see. And you can see very, very few are in that large area, greater than 5 to 10 megawatts. That's changing, that's growing, that's really taking a shift. Up until recently, the largest system we had for a long time was an 11.5 megawatt system, up until maybe about 3 years ago. And that suddenly has all changed. We're getting much larger systems coming in now. This is kind of a depicting where that kind of graphically where a lot of those systems are located, both in around the state, both in numbers and in capacity. I said we had about 0.5% was our requirement that had to be met by 2021, which we did meet within the state. But now there's still, believe it or not, even though there's saturation, we are still getting systems installed, not at a great rate, but they are still trickling in. And we are actually now at 0.6%. I should also add that we don't have any sales tax waiver. So you have to pay the full, it's like a 6% on equipment, at least on that. And we don't have any state tax credit at all either. So it's all pretty much SRECs, the revenue from that, and basically the ITC are the only things that drive it right now. This is now the other side of what's going on is there's an enormous amount of interest in large scale non-DG, not distributed generation, developers that want to install in Pennsylvania. So under PJM, the RTO, Regional Transmission Organization, they are, there's a lot of applications that are going in from big developers to install in Pennsylvania. We have enormous amounts of land for doing that. We have a lot of minelands that has a lot of, brownfields that have a lot of opportunity. You can see in this graph below that there was a huge tick up from like around just over the past 2 years. Back in June 2020 is really where it really kind of kicked up, and it's been growing ever since. So we have like about really over 20 gigawatts of PV in applications that are trying to get through and going through all the different processing of engineering, procurement, under construction, partial. A lot of these fall out, but nevertheless, there's a lot of them in place right now, and are being held up, by the way, with PJM because things are kind of on hold for that. This is the SREC pricing that we've seen in recently from SREC Trade, even though I'm not supposed to show this because of copyright protection. So what? Anyway, I'm promoting their stuff here, so that's a good thing. It's about $42 right now. It's very strange. It's been puzzling for almost any of us to figure out why can the price be as high as it is. It was down as low as $10 and $15 maybe 3 years ago. It was really bottomed out. It had been low for a long time, maybe getting up to $20, but lately it's been up it's been over $40 or $40 about that now. Dropped a little bit, but went back up. And considering that we have met our requirement more than 0.5%, it's puzzling everyone why it's still even this high. Not that it's a fantastic price, but it's certainly worth a worthwhile revenue stream that can come in for that. This is how Pennsylvania ranks against the rest of the northeastern states, actually the whole eastern part of the country, in terms of megawatts installed. And in the upper left graph, you can see we come in like 5th in terms of when you just compare the straight up megawatts of installations in the state. But the bottom graph is really showing it per capita, and that really puts us in last place. So we're in pretty bad shape. You can see that little table on the left on how solar was ranked in Pennsylvania in 2019, 2020, and 2021. And we were pretty bad in 2019. We got a lot better in 2020, and then we fell even worse behind in 2021. So we're looking pretty bad here right now. And this is what's kind of going on when you look at the upper left graph is depicting the trend of the source of electricity when you're looking at coal, natural gas, nuclear, and renewables, and you can see the trend of coal, of course, dropping down, natural gas going up a little bit, nuclear is flatlining, but there's renewables is growing. When you look at Pennsylvania, unfortunately, what we see here is we see that the gas is really taking off at a much steeper climb than it does nationally, and renewables is still relatively flat. It's growing, but it's very, very, very marginal. And this has been a problem. Pennsylvania has enormous amount of gas fracking resources, and that's been really challenging even from a policy standpoint. We also have very conservative Republicans that are pretty much that head the both chambers in the House and the Senate. So it's been a very difficult thing for us to get much legislation through for promoting solar and renewables. So this is kind of a little out of place, but I did want to kind of demonstrate here with this interesting graph of how I kind of wanted to put this together. And this was for our policy, for blowing the myth out, why, concerned about solar just taking up all this farmland and all of our food growth and whatever. So on the left column, there is really the equivalent of all the area across Pennsylvania. And of course, it's going beyond what I could really scale here. So that's why I have those dots up there showing that. And then the next column over is the amount of that area, which is agricultural lands, including woodlands, pasture lands, and croplands. And then the fourth column, the black one, is the abandoned mine lands. We have over 200,000 acres of just abandoned mine lands, brownfields in the state. And then the fourth and last one is really what would be equivalent to 10% solar. It's about, I think it's about 11 or 12 gigawatts of solar, and how much little land would be required in order to meet that criteria as compared to the other prospective parts of the state. And this is finally our legislative guide here that, well, this is coming out of the Pennsylvania Solar Center. I have a website there, and I work closely with my colleague Sharon Pillar over there, founder of Solar Center. And we have been, we have a group called, collaborative, we call Renewables Work for PA. We have a lot of out-of-state developers and in-state installers that are all been involved over the past several years in trying to work out legislation, whether it's expanding the alternative energy portfolio standard, increasing our goals. There's a community solar goal part as well, or bills that have been in place, and a few other things. So this is kind of giving us a summary of some of those bills. We have a 2-year session window in our state, and that is going to be ending this calendar year. So whatever bills we have in place, we will have to establish again going forward. And I should just add that one of the problems that we've had in Pennsylvania is we have gotten in place joining RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, which will be a great revenue stream coming back into our state from all the carbon that's being generated, carbon dioxide. But that, because of that getting through, and that being an executive order through the governor, has really been the challenge for the legislators who greatly oppose it. A lot of the Republicans that are much more for the gas industry, and that has been, because of that moving forward, that's been holding up our getting any kind of sustainable legislation through the wicket. So that's where we stand at that point, and that's all I have to say. There's a lot more, but I had to sum it up. Any questions I'll take. When I should give back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Ron. I think we're going to save Q&A to the end. So
Yeah.
I think we'll just go right over to Andy if you're ready.
I am ready and willing. Let's see here. Can everyone see that slide now?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, great. So quickly, just a quick discussion. I'm going to focus on New Jersey policy here. I am, as of a week ago, the acting VP of policy in New Jersey for MCEA. Let me see if I can, there we go. So first, I just wanted to set the context of solar in New Jersey. New Jersey has long been a solar leader. In fact, you might have noticed on one of Ron's slides that we just crossed 4 gigawatts of solar in New Jersey this year, which is a great achievement for a state the size of New Jersey. And in fact, for a very long time, New Jersey was the number 2 state in the nation, next to only California, in terms of the amount of solar that was going in the ground. So here is just a little bit of a history of the solar industry in New Jersey. It started more than 2 decades ago with a small rebate program supported by net metering. The thing that really allowed solar to take off in New Jersey was this SREC program, Solar Renewable Energy Certificate Program. And this was a tradable REC program. An installer of solar would be eligible for 15 years worth of RECs. And when it was first launched, the compliance payment, so what a utility would have to pay if they didn't procure enough RECs was over $600. And when the program first launched, there were not enough RECs to go around. And so the SREC market was trading in excess of $600, and that provided a really strong incentive for homes and businesses and otherwise to go solar. Now, the other thing that happened pretty much concurrently or just after the real launch of the SREC program is the stimulus program came into place at the federal level. And though some may remember, it was a 1603 cash grant program. And so you see in 2010, 11, and 12, there was just an enormous spike in activity in New Jersey, and that was on the back of that program. Now that spike in activity at the time blew through the renewable portfolio standard. There's certainly the solar carve out at the time, and it really threatened to wipe out the high value of solar renewable energy certificates, such that over the next several years there was a lot of negotiation around how to preserve the solar industry. A lot of solar companies were local companies were worried about whether the market was going to continue and they were going to be able to survive. So there was a negotiation. The RPS was increased, and the SREC market was maintained in kind of the mid 200s for a very long time. Eventually, pressure continued to grow, and such that by 2018, with the Clean Energy Act, there was just a wholesale rewrite of how the solar program was going to work. So that Clean Energy Act did a few things. I'm going to talk in more detail in a bit, but it mandated a transition away from a market-based SREC program to a sort of predetermined, administratively set SREC program. The diagnosis was that the market-based program was way too volatile to really work in practice, and it ended up delivering expensive incentive programs for solar in New Jersey. So we are now just a couple of years into these administratively set programs. The results so far have been good. Immediately on implementation, the value of a REC was cut by at least in half, more than in half in most cases. So the case that the solar industry had been making all along, which was that if you set these administratively, you won't have to have such a rich SREC, has been borne out in practice. So again, a little bit more on the Clean Energy Act. So the market, when the act passed, the market was hovering around 4% and something of electricity sales provided by solar. The act mandated that the market-based SREC trade market would close down when it hit 5.1% of electricity sales. When that happened, there would be a declining RPS for that SREC 1 market, and the BPU, the Board of Public Utilities, the commissioner, committed to the industry that it would maintain a kind of balanced market so that investments that had been made under the assumption of a traded SREC market would not see those investments go south. And so far the BPU commissioner has been making good on that promise, although there's still obviously more years to come. The other thing that this Clean Energy Act did, and this Clean Energy Act is really important for the solar industry in New Jersey. It's very much created the framework for policy in the state. It set a cost cap for solar incentives at 7% of electricity sales, and so that is just has a real impact on what the state can and can't do in terms of growing its market and creating incentives for solar. And then finally, it ordered the creation of a fixed value SREC program moving forward. So I wanted to just talk, top down a little bit about the current policy framework, and I'll go into some more detail about some of these specifics. But we have, like most places by now, an RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard, that gets to 50% by 2035. The state of New Jersey, every 5 years, is required by statute to publish a so-called Energy Master Plan. When this happened in 2019, the latest version, Governor Murphy went ahead and used it to set a goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. I mentioned already the cost cap. The legacy SREC 1 costs are an important constraint. It will go away within, sort of, if you look out 5 years, that constraint will ameliorate. But currently it's an issue. And in particular, as we construct new programs and figure out what incentive levels and so forth we can afford, there seem to be these pinch years in 2025 and 2026. And that's largely because we have kind of banked a few years of the cost being less than the mandated cap, and we sort of spend that bank in around about 2025. And so that's when things get tough, and that very much drives what we can and can't consider when designing new programs. This is something that, to my knowledge, is fairly unique to New Jersey, but we have massive interconnection and grid infrastructure problems currently in the state. So the ability of solar projects to get approval to interconnect is it's difficult, and in certain places in the state, it's near impossible for larger projects. In particular, in the southern part of the state, which is Atlantic City Electric's territory, most of the grid is closed to all but small commercial and residential projects, and I've got a slide on that later. And then finally, I think that this point probably can't be separated from the legacy SREC costs that I mentioned earlier, but there is a constant simmering threat to meet state clean energy requirements from out of state, so to procure them from the PGM network rather than building them all in state. The SUSI program. So this is now the new program that we have finally landed on. SUSI stands for Successor Solar Incentive Program, I believe. So I probably should have capitalized that I. But essentially, it's composed of two parts. One is called the ADI. It's an administratively determined incentive, and that covers the existing segments, the residential, the commercial, and a newish segment of the market, community solar. Each of those segments are targeted at 150 megawatts. And if you remember from a slide earlier, for residential and commercial, that gets pretty close to historic run rates for those segments. And community solar is something new. Now, there's a grid supply portion of the ADI program, which is just in place to kind of provide something while the competitive solicitation program is being finally designed, which is currently underway. That program is for large projects, grid supply type projects, and it's targeted for another 300 megawatts. So that would bring the total New Jersey solar market to 750 megawatts a year. And then in the chart below, you can kind of see the values of the new SRECs. And I mentioned SREC market-based SRECs trading at 600 and in the mid to high 200s over the last decade, and you can see that they're substantially lower. So the transition to a set value, a fixed value REC, has been a tremendous benefit to cost to ratepayers for the solar incentive program. So interconnection. What I've got here, and some of you may have seen these sorts of maps before, but this is a map of the distribution system of Atlantic City Electric, and I just took a screenshot off of their website. But wherever you see black on this map, that means no solar can be connected. Wherever you see red, that means only residential and very small commercial can be interconnected, and so forth. And so you can see that, you know, a substantial portion, a majority of the Atlantic City Electric grid system can't accept new solar projects, which is a major problem for a state that is trying to if anything, grow its solar program. Now, the state recognizes this issue, but has been somewhat slow to act. Atlantic City Electric, to their credit, attempted to solve this issue a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and went before the BPU and said in their rate base case, said we'd like to spend some money to upgrade a bunch of substations that would allow us to fix this problem. The Board of Public Utilities said no, that they didn't want to sort of allow this to happen piecemeal across the state. At that time, it was only Atlantic City Electric that was suggesting such a thing. And so they wanted a kind of statewide solution. They initiated such a program, which we are in the midst of, and it remains to be seen, but it's a year and a half later. And it's fair to say that no tangible action has been taken. In the meantime, I'm only showing the southern part of the state where this problem is most acute, but in the rest of the state, these issues are creeping up, and they're creeping up rapidly, because as you can imagine, as parts of the distribution system get closed to solar, and you're increasing your desired rate of building solar, that the other parts of the distribution system on a proportionate basis are being asked to take more and more. And so that creates an accelerating problem wherever you look. And then my final slide doesn't have anything to do necessarily with New Jersey, but I also chair the residential policy committee at MCEA. So I felt like I should throw in this final slide, which kind of motivates and energizes the work that we do, and the work has to be on a national basis as well as a local basis. But this is just a chart that I lifted from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and it just shows for residential solar, the installation cost in the US as compared to a couple of other very important markets around the world, Germany and Australia. Australia has more than a quarter of their houses with solar on it at this point. So it's a thriving market. Germany, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's getting up there. And the reality is that for a large variety of reasons, we have not been able to follow the same cost decline path in this country as other nations have. And for those of you that know Australia and Germany, this is not a cost of living issue. Their GDP per capita is a little bit less than ours, but not anywhere to close to this degree. It really boils down to a bunch of policies that we have in place, from national to local incentives to different NEC code requirements to tariffs. There's all sorts of things that contribute to this, but it really makes residential solar just a lot more expensive here than it is kind of anywhere else in the world. And that's it for my presentation. So I'll turn it over to you, Gilbert.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and thanks, Ron. This was really interesting, and we appreciate your insights and expertise. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, I think, to moderate the typed in Q&A. I have a couple questions myself, which maybe I could just ask verbally, but maybe let's get to the audience questions first, if that sounds good.
Yeah, perfect. We have a few comments here from Drew Gillett. He says, biggest change in ISO New England is recent 50% hike in overall rates and 100% hike in energy costs due to gas price rise that the IRA should result in lots more on building solar and storage. Behind meter solar and storage is now about 3 gigawatts of 20 gigawatts peak in ISO New England compared to only 0.5 gigawatts of utility solar. He said solar on buildings and parking lots or PV on fences requires no land. And he asks, is ACE accepting new load?
I think that's a question for Andy.
Is ACE accepting new load? Yes, it is, but only where they have deemed that it works. That they can. It's primarily a voltage regulation issue, but it's only on those feeders that would still be in compliance with voltage standards that they need to meet. So the short answer is yes. Now there's a lot more that could be done with for actually just a very little bit of money. Currently, backfeeding substations is not allowed in New Jersey, and for a very little bit of money, upgrades to control systems predominantly, that could open up a lot of these feeders. And there are a few other things, but so it's still a thing. You can still build solar, but just not nearly as much as people want to.
Awesome. And then we have a question from Ricardo from A Linco Irrigation in Chile. They're trying to take off some residential NEM net billing, very shy program by now. They see FERC 2020 or 2222 DER aggregation as a potential future tool as well for residential commercial DERs planning. How is FERC 2222 being taken by PA, New Jersey? Are, if targeted, considered in future planning for solar, wind, small scale projects? If it's considered, what are the current future impacts?
For it certainly, it would be eligible, I think, in the big picture in Pennsylvania, no question about that. But it's but we aren't taking that into significant account right now. We have so many other issues that we're trying to deal with. I mean, by increasing our goals really helps a lot, right now, and that will open up the floodgates for everything else. But it's certainly something that could be very useful, certainly in Pennsylvania.
Any thoughts from you, Andy? Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I just said any thoughts from you, Andy, and Jersey on this FERC order? Yeah.
Nothing really to add. I think that's true of New Jersey as well.
Now, wasn't there a while ago, Sunrun, I thought, did some pilot of that in New Jersey, I believe, a few years back with residential systems with storage. Didn't they do something like that? You familiar with that, Andy? Yeah,
a little bit. I don't know much about the results of it, but yeah, I can confirm that happened. That's about all I can say.
Great. That was actually all the questions and comments in the Q&A. We can get into your questions, Gilbert.
Yeah, I'll keep the discussion going, I guess, for a little bit. I mentioned at the outset, this, I guess, question is for you, Ron, that I have this big grant from CEDO right now, the Solar Energy Technologies Office at DOE, focused on these large utility scale facilities. I used to live and work in Ohio, just your neighbor to the west, and there's, I don't remember, maybe half the amount, maybe 10 gigawatts of installed capacity in the queue at the siting board in Ohio. And a lot of interesting sort of debates, social acceptance, tax revenues, land use issues, all these things. And so I'm kind of working on this as well. And I'm just sort of curious, and I apologize for my ignorance, like what Pennsylvania does in terms of approving these projects. Is a lot of this sort of out at the local level? Is there some sort of state siting agency? And I don't know, like, where do you see the future of this, if you care to comment on that, going? It's, again, interesting debates around where to put these and the siting issues, but they really can enhance like a state's installed capacity figures like dramatically if you just build even a few of these projects, right?
Yeah, well, like I said, there's enormous amount of land that solar can be installed, and again, so much of it could just, 200,000 acres on brownfields or alone would be easily give us 10% of what we need just to even go there. But there's a lot of, we're losing, over like a 3-year period, like 7,000 farms. We're just losing farms left and right. So there's a great opportunity, and there's a lot of drive to look at whether it's community solar or just having solar on farmlands to increase the revenue stream for those farmers, along with growing their crops or whatever, and that could help keep them going. And we've been selling that pretty strongly, and it's been kind of acknowledged by some of the conservative legislators. So realizing that it's up to the farmer to decide. So that's happening. On the big stuff, we have a couple really large projects that are coming on board. Let me see, I think a couple 80 megawatts and 70 megawatts for that's going to be sort of VPPA kind of thing for the city of Philadelphia, for University of Pennsylvania, so there's big projects that are coming on board there, and I think it just continues to grow with opportunities to do that. So and getting down, I guess more to your question is, if it, and I have to say, I'm always been a little confused on how this does sometimes work, but if it's basically, if it's a net metered project up to that 3 or 5 megawatt, that's going to be, a distributed generation size system, that's always going to be an application to connection application that goes to the utility. They're going to have to, work with that. But if it's a larger project that's going to be selling out to the grid, so that will always end up being a PJM application. But there may be some times when they both may be needed, because it could still be on a distribution line, perhaps it's of a large size, and it's kind of crossing over those two areas. So that's kind of the best I understand it to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. The regulatory and approval process for this is so different in different states, right? So in Ohio, I think Minnesota, there's like this installed capacity threshold of 50 megawatts where it goes to the state siting agency to like approve these projects, right? But all of these developers are trying to build in PJM where you guys are, right? And probably in Jersey, Andy, it's like a lot of congestion. There's not a lot of room and land, but maybe in Western PA and definitely into Ohio, there's a lot more acreage to build these projects. So you're seeing all these developers sort of go and swarm in these areas, there's flat land and not a lot of topography too. Yeah.
I'll say this, in New Jersey, it's true. It's a more congested state, and New Jersey has a strong history of trying to support or preserve farmlands, I guess I could say. But I remember when I first started getting into New Jersey, and driving around and such, and you'd go around the back of these strip malls and you'd find a little patch of like a cornfield somewhere. And I was like, what is going on there? and it turns out that they're doing the bare minimum to get by. They can build the strip mall as long as they keep a little bit of farmland. And so one of the arguments that we're trying here, and it remains to be seen if it's going to work, is actually if you do sort of like an agrivoltaics type situation, you're doing a lot more to preserve farmland than the little corn patch next to the strip mall kind of thing. It remains to be seen, but I think there's some open ears to that kind of argument.
Yeah, DOE, CEDO in particular, the funding agency that I'm working with, actually had put out a call earlier this summer for an agrivoltaics funding opportunity. So I'm excited to see who they fund and what projects they're working on and that type of thing. My other question, super quick, I don't know if I have time, but was just about like the RPS details and implementation. You know, we're seeing states get more aggressive. I think here in Illinois, we have 50% by 2040 and zero carbon, 100% zero carbon by 2050. We have a lot of nukes here in Illinois. And I've always just been like generally curious about sort of the devil's in the details of implementation, right? We have this target, it's 20 years in the future. We'll see how it goes. And I'm interested, you had mentioned, Andy, these energy master plans and like utilities with their IRPs or other ways that we can sort of like have incremental check-ins to see if we're actually achieving these targets or like on pace to achieve them. And there's a question in there somewhere, but I don't know if you all have any thoughts on like, how do we actually get there? Like, is this feasible? You know, like, are we going to get to this 40 and 50% and all these RPS goals that states are putting out there?
Yeah, well, I'll say this. I think the answer is yes. First of all, just to give you a little bit of color, so the Energy Master Plan, if you zero in on the solar portion of it, it says that by 2035 we're supposed to have 17 gigawatts of solar. We currently have 4. So that if you do the math, that's about a gigawatt a year between now and 2035. I just described the SUSE program, which targets 750 megawatts, so 3/4 of the way there. So we need to do a little bit better than the SUSE program, but not a whole lot. And so if you take at faith that the Energy Master Plan right now, I can't go into all the detail, does in fact add up at the end of the day, yeah, you can see how you can get there.
That's helpful. Yeah. I guess, Lauren, I don't know, I'll turn it over back to you for final remarks. I don't know if a couple more questions.
Yeah, we actually had 2 more questions come in. One from Drew. SREX is on production and provided on top of net metering, correct?
Yeah.
And then from Carl, we're never going to get Republicans on board until we convince their base that solar is the future, and that can only happen through the economic argument. What efforts are underway and what incentives do we have to convince the average carbon-based worker to move from working in coal mines and on gas wells to installing solar panels on roofs?
Well, that is a challenge. I mean, you know, well, we don't have too much coal mine issues here in Pennsylvania any longer, except for our waste coal, which happens to be in our APS, bizarrely enough. And they're running cryptocurrency like machines all the time. But besides all that, you know, you would think, and we thought we were able to persuade some of our conservative legislators about, hey, this is a great job creator, and that worked for a little while, and then it seemed like it just, you know, just met deaf ears after for you know, I don't know why. So it's been always a challenge to find what is that sensitive spot that's going to trigger their interest, and it's always coming down to, I think, you know, really revenue. It's hard. We have this big gas mountain we are always up against to compete against all the time, and that's been, I think, an issue, and we'll just continue to have that challenge all the time here.
I can jump in real quick on this because this is like a very pointed like piece of my own research personally. I do a lot of these economic impacts and workforce and like tax sort of related studies for these like energy transitions, right? And so we've been doing a lot of work in the Appalachian region trying to understand the knowledge, skills, abilities, education levels of coal miners, coal-fired power plant employees. Like, can they plug into emerging occupations? It doesn't have to be even renewable energy, but like, can they work in, you know, the solar construction sector and this type of thing? And we have a lot of really great data on wages and like education, retraining efforts. One of the challenges that I've seen across the board for this is like, who is the onus on, right? Is it on the utility that's closing their coal-fired power plant to make sure that they can find new jobs for their displaced workers? Is it on state folks? Is it on local economic and workforce development agencies or practitioners? Is it the county commissioners? Is it the technical schools and colleges? Like, there's a lot of sort of cooks in the kitchen, which is a good thing, but sometimes they're not always coordinated in these efforts to make sure that they can help with these workforce transitions. So I have a policy brief if it's of interest to like ACES folks that I'm happy to share on some of the wage gaps and the educational gaps, and some sort of like paths forward, some creative policy mechanisms for like tax credits, for instance, for retraining workers, or K through 12 STEM educational efforts to make sure that we have an adequate supply of clean energy workers heading into the future. So if any of that's of interest, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Likewise.
Thanks.
Great. Anything else from your end, Lauren, or should we start to wrap up?
No, nothing on my end. Do any of you all have any final comments before we close?
I mean, I'll just jump in and say, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I chair the policy division for ASIS. So if any folks on the line now, or for yourself, Ron and Andy, like want to get involved in some of our efforts, please let me know, because we're always looking for folks to help out with ASIS efforts. So
Mhm.
Same with Anthea.
yeah.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much, Gilbert, Andy, and Ron, for your fantastic presentation on Northeast solar policy today. And thank you all attendees for attending this monthly webinar. I hope to see you all on our next webinar next month. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
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 Thank you.